Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming this evening. We're going to start our program. My name is Paul Collins, and on behalf of the Jenks Center, the Winchester Seniors Association, and the Council on Aging, welcome to the Jenks Center and to the symposium entitled Outliving Your Income. And in fact, it's a bit of a misnomer because our guest tonight, who I'll introduce, will help guide us into not outliving our income as we plan and execute their suggested strategies. We have three panelists tonight, and the format is each panelist will speak on a topic of expertise for 20 minutes, and then we'll have roughly 30 minutes for questions and answers. So if you can hold your questions, write them down, remember them. We'll take them all as a panel discussion at the end of our presentation. So I'm going to quickly introduce our three speakers. Our first speaker tonight is Catherine Valega, who is a Winchester resident, a certified financial planner who specializes in, among other things, retirement planning, estate planning, and tax planning. And she's the owner of Greenbridge Wealth Management, a financial consulting firm here in town, and she's been gracious enough to discuss how to plan before it's too late. So if you're here tonight, the good news is, by definition, it's not too late. It's never too early, as I tell my children, but they haven't listened to that yet. Following Catherine's presentation, Thomas Woodhouse will speak. Tom is also a financial planner. He's well known to the Jenks community in a variety of ways. He's been a keynote speaker here in the past and has helped in various projects. Tom's had a long career as a financial planner with several firms, and he's currently the managing director of Seawood Management. And he's going to talk about how to protect your investments. So you first have to plan, and then you have to protect. And his title is How to Protect Your Investments So They Will Last for a Lifetime. One host. And lastly, we have Michael Fester, who is not a financial planner. He's a longtime state representative from the city of Melrose. He served for 2 years as Secretary of the Commonwealth Secretary of Elder Affairs under Governor Deval Patrick from 2007 to 2009, and he's currently the State Director of AARP Massachusetts. And he's going to give us a talk where we project into the future, and he's going to look at the future costs of senior health care. So I think between the three topics, we'll have a well-rounded program, and then we'll pose questions to our three guests. And I would like to say, I'd like a round of applause and say thank you to our three guests for joining us tonight and sharing their expertise. And since I'm the only one here who has nothing really meaningful to say, I'll turn it over to Kathy.
Thank you. I like to move around, so if I get a little too far from the microphone, let me know. My mother told me I talk loudly, which is good, but I also talk really quickly. So if I'm speaking too quickly, just put your hand up and say, slow down, say it again, and I will start again. So tonight we're going to talk about getting real about your retirement. Being honest with yourself. What do we need to focus on as we prepare for retirement? And I'm going to put it out there. I'm going to speak to pre-retirees, people who are very close to retirement, as well as those who are in retirement. And I want everyone to learn something tonight. If you don't learn at least one thing you didn't know before, then come see me, and I will have a chat with you about something else you'd like to learn about. My office is a block away next to St. Mary's. So hopefully you'll all learn something tonight. We're going to start with, there we go. So there's 6 simple steps to preparing for your retirement. We want to get honest about how much money we're going to need. We want to get real at where the money's going to come from, right? Saving early and regularly. investing in a diversified portfolio, managing risk, insurance, and estate plan, and getting help from trusted advisors along the way. So step number one, how much money are you really going to need in retirement? So there are a bunch of guidelines out there, and again, these are general guidelines, and everyone's situation is very individual and specific. But at a minimum, you want to consider saving, or needing rather, 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement income. And I would argue that your high net worth client, so 100,000 and above for this scenario, you're going to need at least 100% of your income, maybe more. Depends on your lifestyle. Some people are traveling, some people want to give money to kids or grandkids or charities. What does that mean? Saving at least 10 to 20, even as high as 25% we'll see of your annual income, 10 to 25% times your annual income. So how much you're going to need is budgeting. And this is really taking an honest look at where you're spending your money. Fixed expenses versus discretionary. Fixed expenses, things that you cannot live without. Your mortgage, if you still have one, utilities, food, insurance, versus discretionary. These are the nice to have. Travel, hobbies, maybe you like to go out to dinner once a week, maybe you treat grandkids to a trip to the Cape to have a family reunion every year. What are the nice to have? There's two different categories. And don't forget about your health care costs. There are a lot of studies out there, and in fact I'm going to point to today, actually, both the New York Times and the Globe refer to health care costs that you need in addition to your spending. An average 65-year-old couple is going to need $200,000 additional for health care. This is not long-term care costs. We haven't even talked about that yet. This is maintenance, your eyes and your hips and your drugs, and everything gets more expensive. So don't forget about the health care costs. So where does the money come from? There are two main sources of guaranteed income: Social Security and traditional pension defined benefit plans. I'm hoping some of you still have access to defined benefit plans, but probably most of you don't, and forget about younger generations. These just aren't out there anymore. So the rest of your money for retirement is going to come from your additional savings. Personal savings, 401ks, IRAs, annuities, home equity. Is there equity in your home? And we can think about downsizing, and possibly jobs. Many of you are going to continue working part-time or even full-time, as long as you can. So saving. Under the current system, Social Security system, for lower income earners, so $50,000 and below, Social Security currently can replace, these are just general guidelines, approximately 40% of your pre-retirement income. But as you get higher, if you're a higher earner, you're looking at 30% or lower, right? Social Security is a small part of what you need each year to live on. A couple things to talk about Social Security here. You can no longer get the statements. The statements aren't going to be mailed to you anymore. You actually have to go on to the Social Security Administration website and request the statement. And if you are still earning, you want to look at this statement every year to make sure that they've captured your earnings correctly. You only have 5 years in which to correct those earnings if they're incorrectly reported. And the last thing, before you decide to claim Social Security, you need to know that the Social Security process is an art. There are so many nuances, and you don't want to go sit down at the Social Security office and ask that worker there to tell you when you should claim. You really want to talk to an expert in Social Security and decide whether you're claiming at your earliest retirement age, if you can defer it, what the spousal benefits, all kinds of bells and whistles in Social Security. So as we already talked about, Social Security is only going to give you a portion of what you need in retirement. there is something called creating a pension, right? Taking some of your assets and turning them into a fixed income stream that you're not going to outlive. Now, how do you know if you should actually approach this, creating your own pension? Going back to what we talked about, how much you need in retirement, your fixed expenses. If your fixed expenses, what you absolutely need to live on, forget the discretionary, your fixed expenses are greater than your guaranteed income sources, you may need to think about creating your own pension. And how do you do this? One of the ways to do this is via annuities. Ruth had asked me in particular to discuss annuities. So we're going to talk a little bit about how they work and some of the things to think about. So what is an annuity? An annuity is an insurance, a contract issued by an insurance company that includes an option to turn your income into an income stream that you cannot outlive. Okay? In return for, oh, there we go. Let's see. Fixed expenses. Okay, can you, let's just see if this will work. There we go. Very good. For the annuity contract, you're going to cede control of the assets in return for these guaranteed payments. And this is where there's a lot of misconception. People tend to think, if I buy an annuity, I spend $100,000, I get a $5,000 income payment, I die tomorrow, and there goes all that money. And that's really no longer the case. There are death benefits inherent in it. But what is true is that you do cede control of these assets. So either it's invested in something that you really don't have much choice on, or your investment options are fewer than you would prefer if you had your money outside of the annuity. So this is a quote I came upon as I was putting this presentation together. People always live forever when there is an annuity to be paid them. And interestingly enough, that was actually written by Jane Austen in 1811 in Sense and Sensibility. So, and I'm going to give you one other aside here as well. There is an annuity academic from Canada by the name of Mosh Milevsky. And he writes, and it's interesting because annuity makes you think about your mortality. He writes, "We agree that it might seem quite odd to buy insurance against a blessing, living a long life. But the insurance doesn't protect you against living a long life. It protects you against the cost of this outcome if it materializes." So you want to think about it as a good thing, right? Needing an annuity and hopefully for life. So let's talk a little bit about the nuances of annuities. There are a lot of different bells and whistles in annuities, and we're going to touch upon them. Annuities can be fixed or variable. The payout, your income stream, is already determined, fixed, or variable. It can depend on the underlying performance of your investments. Your income can be immediate or deferred. There are some annuities that you dump a chunk of change into, $100,000, and the next month you turn on an income stream. And that will come to you every month or quarter or annually, whatever your payout is. Or you invest your money and it's going to sit and grow, hopefully to a much bigger pot, so that when you turn on your income later, it's going to be based on a larger pot of money. Income payout periods. So again, there are all kinds of choices in annuity world. You can pay out annuity for one life only, or you can choose to pay out an annuity for your life and your spouse's life, or you can choose to have the payout for a certain period, so maybe 10 years, period certain. All different payout periods to choose. Death benefits, you usually get back your contract value. You can pay to have higher death benefits. And survivorship we talked about for you and your spouse. But let me say, and you don't see the negatives up here, I'm going to mention the negatives. All of these options cost money. Okay, annuities, they tend to get a bad rap because expenses can be high, they are very complex, there are potential surrender fees, and you're also at the mercy of the insurance company, the stability of the insurance company. There are places for annuities in many people's portfolio, however. in spite of all these negatives, they can play an important role, especially if you need to create your own pension. I just want to touch upon a little bit further in the tax deferral piece. So this is one of my favorite aspects of annuities. What this chart is showing you is $100,000 invested for 20 years, giving you an 8% return, and you're in a 28% tax bracket. Okay, after 20 years, if this money is in a taxable account, you've earned about $300,000. That pot has grown to $300,000. But if it has been tax deferred, and so your gains are just compounding and compounding, you've earned more than $150,000 more. So I really like annuities. When people come to me and they've already maxed out their retirement planning possibilities, so your 401ks or 403bs or IRAs, but we need more money, right? We just saw how much we're all going to need to accumulate for retirement. The next thing I turn to are annuities. I really like this tax-deferred aspect of it. There we go. Step 4 is investing. Now, I have 4 basic principles. Tom's presentation goes really much more into detail about investing specifics, so I'm going to just kind of highlight. And tell your friends, your family, your grandchildren, invest as early as you can, as often as you can, and as regularly as you can, okay? Spread the word, tell everybody. Even retirees, however, need to make sure that they invest for the long term. So you may be in retirement for 30 years. And there are myths in the retiree world that as soon as you retire, you should put your money into cash or bonds. Those are the safe investments. You need to make sure you have a diversified portfolio, including equity stocks, including international companies. You want to diversify, rebalance your portfolio. Things get out of whack as markets move. And you want to make sure you monitor it, at least annually, if not semi-annually or quarterly. Not every day, which I see a lot of retirees tend to do, and they drive themselves crazy. Don't look at it every day, but monitor it and work with someone to help you monitor it. Financial advisors use this slide a lot. So what this is showing us is the average annual return of the S&P 500, which is the basket of large cap U.S. stocks. Almost 8%. Now this is a time period from 92 to 2011. That's the data. It would look even higher now. Almost 8%. But the average equity mutual fund investor has only earned 3.5%. Why? Because people tend to panic when markets go down. They don't know what to do. They sell out. 2008 is a perfect example. People sold out and then missed the market return, and it has come back plus some. So as a financial advisor, we work to close that gap, right? We want our clients to get the market return, if not better, and improve that average investor return. Step 5 is managing risk. So in all of this scenario, right, we've talked about how much you need, how you're going to save, what are the various income pieces of the pie. You want to make sure you've reviewed your insurance coverages and your estate plan. So Medicare, Medi-Cal Advantage, every year we're talking about it. Long-term care insurance. I am a big believer in pure risk management, having a long-term care insurance policy. But they're getting expensive. And some of the caveats, you have to pay this premium every year. And now you're 85 and the $4,000 bill comes through and you're like, I just can't make this work. So with a lot of my clients, and I'm selling long-term care insurance policies as young as 30s and 40s, there are a few remaining carriers out there that allow you to pay premiums for 10 years and then you're done. It's nice in the respect that you only have 10 years in which they can raise those premium costs, then you're done, and you also don't need to worry about it when you're much older, coming up with that check. Life insurance is a big piece of many estate planning, should be an important part of a lot of estate planning couples in their estate planning now. Massachusetts, the federal estate planning limits are well over $10 million for a couple. And Massachusetts has a $1 million cutoff. They have not increased that. And a lot of you are going to hit that already just with your house if you've lived anywhere in this area for the past 10, 20 years. So life insurance is a great way to think about passing money to your spouse or to your children or charitable organizations of your choice. Hybrid products. The long-term care insurance industry has gotten expensive, as I said, and there are insurers who are dropping out. They just realized they couldn't keep pace. Too many people actually claimed on their long-term care policies. So what's happening is insurers are coming up with these hybrid products. So one of them is a hybrid life, long-term care, or return of premium product. I'll give you an example. You are 65, you spend $100,000 for a life insurance policy. Your death benefit is going to grow, not a lot, 110, 115, depends on your health and your the actuary calculations. But you're also going to have access to a pot of money for long-term care if you need it. And then the third option is you get a return of premium. So these hybrid products aren't the best life insurance products, they aren't the best long-term care insurance products, but you're going to get your money one way or the other. And people really are starting to like these type of products versus long-term care where you find people sometimes are skeptical, I'm not going to need it, my spouse is going to need whatever. I prefer the pure products, but some people say, I don't believe in the pure ones, I don't want to spend the money, let's look at the hybrids. And then estate planning. Don't forget to consult with an attorney, get your estate in order, and review it. Things change, and you want to look at your plan every couple of years. And then the sixth step is get help, right? Everyone should have an advisor. I was joking earlier that I went to the dentist today, that my sister's a dentist, but she's not in this room. I hate going to the dentist. I had my teeth cleaned. However, I'm not outsourcing my teeth to my husband or my neighbor. I'm going to the expert in dental care. And that's the same thing you want to do in financial and estate planning and tax planning. You want to make sure you have help. If you have someone you like, you should always feel free to get a second opinion. You want to make sure you review your plan regularly and monitor it. And you also want to share information with your loved ones. So make sure that they know, who has your estate planning documents, who can access funds if something happens and we need to write some checks. Make sure you share it. That's it. Fine. Just to recap, how much money you're going to need, you want to think about it. Where is it coming from? Save as much as you can, as regularly as you can, as early as you can. Investing in a diversified portfolio, and Tom's going to turn it over into a little bit more details on the investments. Managing your risk, the insurance, and the estate plan, and don't forget to ask for help. Thank you.
Tom Woodhouse is going to now take the task of telling us how to protect our investments.
Good evening. First, I'd like to thank Ruth Young and the Winchester Council on Aging for having me here tonight. I also see a couple of the board members from the investment committee for the Jenks Center, for whom I manage the investment endowments for this organization. I was looking, I noted that 4 days ago was the 10th anniversary that myself and Seward have been involved with Winchester, and we're very proud to do so. So Catherine talked about how to organize your assets, how to gather them, how to protect them in terms of what instruments and type to use. I'm going to try to tell you how not to spend them all out in one spot. So how not to outlive your investments. The other one. There we go, that other one. So what's the first couple of things to consider? It's investment risk. Obviously, stock market risk. I'm pretty clear about that. Another risk, though, is that we're currently having low interest rate environment right now. We're not getting any income from your investments. Next, you got to worry about if interest rates rise, the value of those fixed income investments can go down. You have to worry about the principal. Okay? We have to worry about inflation. There's talk about the fact that all this Federal Reserve quantitative easing is at some point going to promote inflation. We don't have it now. People are talking about. And finally, you have longevity risk. You have the risk that you outlive your money. So, what are additional risks to consider? You got government risks, tax changes, changes to the Social Security entitlement programs, political change, not just Washington, but here in Massachusetts. Sovereign country risk. Do I have to tell anybody that we just went up against the debt ceiling and everyone was talking about whether we're going to default? It's just not worrying about third world countries defaulting. We talk about the U.S. Currency risk, whether you're investing either internationally or even domestically. And of course, terrorism and war. Other considerations, investment illiquidity. If you're in real estate and all of a sudden now you need a liquidity event, you have to worry about getting marketability of your securities. Pension risk. If you are going to have a risk that your corporation is going to go out and run out of money and default on the pension, you might go back to the PBGC, Pension Board Guarantee Corp, which is a government-run backstop for defaulted pension plans. You've got general corporate default if you're invested in bonds. You've got insurance risk. Catherine talked about annuities and life insurance, but you do have to worry about the insurance company going out of business. You've got health concerns, and Catherine talked about covering that with long-term care insurance. And finally, you have to worry about you spend too much. You're a spendthrift. Okay? So there's a risk right there. Okay, so what's different about today about retiring? Catherine talked on one aspect, was the fact that today you don't get as many defined benefit pension programs as you used to. You used to talk about the three-legged stool: Social Security, your pension, and your personal savings. Well, defined benefits have gone away. Very few people still, any young employees don't have them. Older employees may still have them, but anyone out in the workplace today generally does not have a pension coming their way. They're down to a two-legged stool, which everyone knows is not very stable. They're on Social Security, and then they have to save themselves. The problem is people are not saving as much these days. Low savings rates. What's the next issue? We've got a low interest rate environment. You're not going to get a yield. What's the other concern? Heck, we just went through 2 bear markets in the last 13 years. That was not a lot of fun. Okay? So it's making it much harder to retire today. So what investment considerations? Clearly diversification. You can go by security, individual security, market sector, whether you're in industrials, utilities, healthcare, et cetera. You can go by style, meaning whether you're in value versus growth. Maybe you're in municipal bonds versus corporate bonds. And then you've got asset class, stocks, bonds, real estate, equities, et cetera, international. You worry about the quality of what you're investing in. It's pretty obvious. And then both the yield and the growth potential, if you look at that. And finally, the last thing you should consider is correlation to other assets. And what I mean by this is that you don't want everything moving in the same direction. You want investments that provide a return that don't work in the same direction. So if one's not working, the other is. Stocks and bonds do not necessarily correlate exactly, so they work to some degree, but not making sure all your investments are all correlated to go in the same direction. Now what's that lead to? Diversified portfolio of cash, bonds, and stocks. I'm not going to go into it, but alternatives can enter into the equation. Those can be commodities, precious metals, hedge funds, private equity, REITs, and MLPs, master limited partnerships. But the point is building a diversified portfolio. So, what's the most basic spending rule that's out there? This is the most common you read. You can read it in any number of publications, quotes, etc. It's generally saying that you can spend about 4% of your principal out of your portfolio. And I've got a big fat asterisk there, and we'll talk about the caveats of that in the next page. What that means is that if you have a $500,000 portfolio, that means you can take income out of that of about $20,000, 4%. Now for planning purposes, you could then say, instead, if you need a portfolio for planning for what Catherine's talking about going into retirement, and say, I want $100,000 in income from my investments. What do you need? You need $2.5 million. You need 25 times that income. Okay? And I'll talk about what that means in terms of sustainability. So what's that mean? This is what's called the constant real spending rule. So you're able to make annual distributions that increase annually with inflation. Okay, so 4%, but the next year you get to increase your distribution by the rate of inflation. Okay? With this, you have a good probability, not a guarantee, and I'll show you in a minute what those probabilities are, that you can sustain that investment portfolio for 25 years and not run out of money. Okay? A good probability, but not a guarantee, and we'll talk about that. Okay? These are based on historical market returns, but future returns may not repeat. So we're in a different world today because of this low interest rate environment, and we'll talk about that. But this is using historical results. And that's the problem with most financial plans. They're all looking in the rearview mirror. Instead, you've got to look forward. Okay, what worked in the past was fine, but now we've got to look ahead. Okay, you want a diversified portfolio. Generally, you want stock exposure in portfolios greater than 50% to be able to maintain the sustainability. We'll, again, talk about those probabilities. Rebalance periodically. You've got some taxes to pay, federal, state, and you generally have to pay somebody a fee to do that. That's either me or a mutual fund, because a mutual fund charges a fee. Now, if you're savvy enough and you can do this on your own, I highly recommend like a Vanguard index, where you can then just pay Vanguard a very low fee and you can pocket the difference. If you don't have that, you need the advice of a professional, or you're paying a mutual fund company to do that for you. So what are some other spending models? I just talked about the constant real. When you ever see the word real, you mean inflation adjusted spending model. You can have a retirement stage model where people talk about the fact that retirees go through different stages of need of income. The first couple of years, the middle, the end. Okay, spending generally decreases. You can make the spending rule investment return dependent, so it depends on what the investment returns actually are. You can make it dependent on your flexibility to spend what you have each year. And finally, you can have a life cycle process which incorporates more of a holistic, both pre-retirement and post-retirement. It's looking more like what your needs are to sustain your lifestyle. Anyway, I'll give you a reference in the last page. Anybody that has a handout, there's a reference that will take you to any full discussion of all of these different spending models. Okay, so what are some other retirement considerations? You can decide that you're going to spend all your money. I've had clients tell me, I want my last check to go to the undertaker. Okay, that's fine. One of my other partners says, then that's fine. That's the die broke plan. But the converse is you don't want a broke die. Okay, so planning's your last check to go for your funeral services sounds like a good idea. It's probably not the most savvy way to do that. You may have inheritance or legacy issues. Clearly, you may want to pass some assets on to other people. This involves estate planning. You may have charitable intent, so you got to factor that into who you're likely to want to give money out to charities. You also have annual gift exclusions. You can give money on each year, $14,000 per person to anybody that you want. Okay. Couples, then you can double that, $28,000 using the marital exemption. And finally, educational and medical support is exempt from this gift. So many grandparents may give directly to the school. They're able to fund the grandchildren's tuition payments. Okay, so those are other retirement considerations. Okay, so now what's this actually mean? Okay, so let's take the probability of taking a portfolio and making it last 25 years. Let's take that portfolio, let's just start with a half portfolio that's half stocks, half bonds, and I have 4% withdrawal rates. Using historical returns, and this is from 1926 to 2006, using 25-year periods, that portfolio had a 96% chance of surviving, okay? Using all those factors, okay? Half stocks, half bonds, 4% withdrawal rate, you can survive 96% over a 25-year period. Look what happens if you increase the spending rate, okay? The probability goes down pretty fast. And then look what happens if you decide, oh, I'm going to be, quote, super safe. I'm going to be 100% bonds. And you increase the spending rate. Oops, you have zero chance of lasting 25 years, okay? So this is the notion that you do need some growth in a portfolio, and we've boxed out the 80% success rate sort of just arbitrarily, but it definitely shows you that you can't spend too much, okay, and you do need some growth. Okay? So let's go use an example. Here's retiree A. They got some Social Security, $24,000. They got a pension, they're one of the lucky few, $16,000. And then they've got this portfolio of $500,000, and they've invested in 65% stock, 35% bond, and they're taking a 4% distribution. Okay, 4% of $500,000, there's 20,000. So the total retirement income is 60K. Now, based on historical, history, that 65-35 is somewhere in here. They're taking 4%. So on a historical basis, they should be able to sustain that portfolio over their retirement period. Let's look at retiree B. Social Security, same. Okay, this time they may have bought an annuity, paying $12,000 a year, $1,000 a month. Okay, But this time, they only have a $300,000 portfolio, and they decided to invest that in 25% stock, 75% bond, and they want to take out 8% because they want to get $24,000 from that portfolio, and so their total income is $60,000. This retiree is going to have some problems, and it's because why? 25% stock, 75% bond, 8% distribution. Guess what? They're probably going to run out of money. They're just not getting enough return in their portfolio to sustain that 8% distribution. Now, 8% just isn't 8%. Remember, you're still having to pay somebody usually a fee, either in a mutual fund, or me, or somebody, even Vanguard if you're only paying a couple percent. And two, you generally have some taxes involved. Capital gains, dividends, certainly if it's an IRA, because any withdrawals from the IRA are fully taxable. So, how do you build out a portfolio? Okay? We start by looking at the different asset allocations, stocks and bonds. Okay? We then look at the equity return assumptions that you might get. I've used 6, 8, and 10%. And then using today's environment, we're getting possibly a 2.5% dividend, a bond yield. There's your 1% fee and effective tax rate. I'm generally just fudging a little bit here, but either the dividends, cap gains, et cetera, and it's on the margin. It's probably not at the full rate. When you apply in then to spend 4% and you go net of fees, net of taxes, 100% stock portfolio, you can earn 7.2% from that portfolio. Now, it's not shows up well in this, but it does on the handout. I've knocked these colors out as green just to show what does it take to get that magic 4% number. And in today's environment, it either means you need a high allocation to stocks, or you have to have a pretty good assumption that you're going to have pretty good equity returns to get above that 4% hurdle. You're going to have a tough time reaching the 4% hurdle with only 30% in the stock portfolio. Why? Because the yield's so low in this environment. So, here's what we're facing. We've got a 30-year trend of 10-year treasury yields that have gone down. Okay? And back in the heyday of the early 80s, pre-Paul Volcker, when he's busting inflation, you could get about 12% on a 10-year treasury. And now, of course, you're down into the mid-2s. Stock market, pretty good ride, and then boom, boom. We had pretty nasty hits there, the tech boom, and we just went through now the housing crunch with the housing crisis. Okay? So we're in a difficult environment to which to be able to construct these portfolios to achieve that 4% return. Okay? So what are some other investment considerations? Well, we're working under ZIRP, zero interest rate policy. It's the Fed. Okay? We're at 0% interest rates on short-term money market funds, and we've got quantitative easing, which is pushing down long-term rates. That's suppressing bond yields. Okay? That's a low-yield environment then for any quality investment. The problem is if you try to go stretching for yield, you can run into some risk. You're either going longer maturities, okay, or you're going lower quality, junk bonds. Okay? There is no free lunch. I get people all the time saying, hey, I can get 4% over here. Okay, well, that's fine. Let's look at that. What is that 4%? It generally involves some kind of risk, and you shouldn't discount what that risk is. And what's that mean? It means you're pushed to equities. One of our research partners calls this a TINA market. There is no alternative. Okay? Zero cash, low bond yields. Where are you getting the return? You're getting pushed into equities because there's no other place to get it. So the question is, should a 3% number really be more realistic today looking forward? Remember that 4% number is historical. That's using historical returns when you can get 4 or 5% in a bond yield. You can't get that today. Maybe a 3% distribution is more sustainable. Again, looking forward, you can't look backwards. And so how do you improve your odds? This dovetails into some of those other spending models, but maybe you need to make your distributions dependent on what actually happens in the immediate years, and also being able to decrease your distributions when you have weak returns. But it does mean you have to be flexible to be able to try to blast your money out and improve your odds of being sustainable over a 25-year period. So here's a couple references. Anybody that knows Vanguard knows that Jack Bogle was the founder of Vanguard, and a couple of his fans are called Bogleheads, and they've created this community website with support, and it's a great resource with some calculators and spending things. There's actually 32 free and 12 for purchase.
spending models. There's Vanguard, there's T. Rowe Price, there's Fidelity, there's AARP, et cetera, but there's a whole host of others where you might find some interest of plugging in the numbers and just seeing what the models show you. If you don't want, and you really want something really sophisticated, this is a free program that's out there, wacalc.com. I can't vouch for it in terms of how useful you might find it, but it's fairly robust and has a lot of variables that take into account a lot of options. So that's it.
Michael Festa will speak on the future costs of senior health care. Michael.
Thank you very much, Paul. Oh, no PowerPoint. Are we disappointed? Good. I'm not. Can you hear me okay? So, we listened, I watched your faces, last two presentations, you were riveted. I don't know how you could do that, because that stuff glosses over me now. I'm going to give you a little disclosure. I have been a lawyer for 33 years, former member of the National Academy of Elder Law Attorneys. I know a lot of the legal stuff, not here to talk about it. That's point number one. The second thing is, when you think of AARP, maybe you're thinking all the products, the service, the products, you know, and the things we're into. Not here to talk about that at all. Exactly. I have been the state director of AARP for a year, and I thought I should give you a real quick understanding of really what my message is about and where I'm coming from. AARP is a complex organization. I mean, we do a lot of work in services and products. I'm sure many of you in this room are members of AARP. We have 820,000 members in Massachusetts, 37 million in the country. So it's, you know, we're a big organization. But the fact of the matter is that the work that I do, and the work that our staff does both in Boston and in Massachusetts as well as in Washington, in the subject area I'm going to talk about, is in advocacy and focused attention on some of the issues that are affecting your daily lives that require, you know, this kind of sophisticated preparation in every way that you must. And I know, looking at this, you're staying in the neighborhood, and Melrose not that far away, most of you in this room have the good judgment to have had professional advice with regard to both law, legal issues, investments, etc. And you're in this room most likely because either you want to hear confirmatory, conversation around that, you have, very important questions in terms of some of these products and services. But the fact of the matter is that sometimes things are truly beyond our control, at least as individuals. And yet at the same time, and I'm here to talk about healthcare costs, at the same time, there are things we do and should continue to do, and things we haven't thought of doing, that AARP is very interested in encouraging folks to consider. Now, let's get some facts out of the way. Did anybody read the Globe this morning? Talk about ironic moments of time. And got up and read the Globe this morning. I didn't do it online, by the way. I'm an old-fashioned guy. I guess they'll live it. So what's the front page of the business section all about? Healthcare costs are pounding retirees. I mean, not that you didn't know that, right? But the truth of the matter is the crisis around healthcare costs are just dwarfing a lot of the sensible, thoughtful, investment decisions you're making. And where are the controls around this? Okay, where is the confidence? Do we have the confidence of the government? Well, you know what? Most people don't. I understand that. I'm not here to talk politics. I've done it for 40 years. I do know this. When you consider the Medicare question, how many folks are on Medicare? Get Medicare? Okay. So we've got, a good solid majority, maybe 75% of this room, are in the Medicare system. Now, one of the things that AARP is doing a lot of work on, and I just want to sort of paint this picture, we have a policy institute which does a lot of research on all the issues that affect our members, and this runs the gamut. I can tell you now that in the conversations that are happening in Washington and in our state offices, the overarching two themes of our members' concerns and our response to those concerns are in the areas of health care and financial security. Nothing else really gets near those concerns. And so when it comes to healthcare costs, I can tell you we're doing a lot of work. There may have been conversation around that. I'm not sure if Jason and the other team last week, I know we were just talking about some of this, but you know, the situation with Medicare is pretty gruesome. Why do I say that? Because the solvency of the Medicare system as it's presently projected and the way we are seeing the environment is a lot worse than even the conversation we're hearing about Social Security. Quick point about Social Security. I don't know what the situation is in this room, but I can tell you in Massachusetts, which is a pretty high income state relative to the country, about half the people, I'm going to say this real slow, half the people in Massachusetts rely on Social Security for 90% of their income. All right? There you go. This is, I like that in the front row. He's coming up with good reactions. But that's all right, so that's a heck of a thing to consider. So I want to assure you that for those of you who are, you know, maybe not in that place, but are very concerned about the solvency of Social Security, we're doing a lot of work on that, and we are certainly concerned about, you know, keeping up with inflation, although it is down. Historically, we know, you know, with the spikes, and, you know, every one of you in this room fully appreciate that inflation will return, and you remember those days, and you live long enough to remember them more than once. So suffice to say that the need to keep up with benefits in terms of inflation is an area we do a lot of work in. But I'm here to talk now specifically about Medicare, because, you know, there is a single-payer system in this country when it comes to healthcare costs in a simplistic way. If you're 65, that's where the bulk of your healthcare costs are being addressed. But you know, the fact is that probably no more than 60% of your actual healthcare costs are being paid for through Medicare. If you add up it all, I mean, just sort of calculate in your own mind, maybe you've thought this through, maybe you're dealing with it directly. There are coverage gaps. There's a donut hole around prescriptions. There are increases in co-pays. In certain circumstances, there are these supplemental plans. And there's a lot of confusion about that. And I can tell you that one of the things that AARP is trying to do, and we're really focused on this, and perhaps if you remember nothing else about what I'm saying tonight, regardless of the politics or the opinions on these subjects, one thing AARP is very wedded to. We are evidence-based, we are issue-based, we are research-based. And so if you want an understanding of a circumstance, for example, show me in intelligible terms what Medicare is going to cover and what it isn't going to cover. And how do I figure out in my own environment what I'm now dealing with? That hospitalization, just went to Winchester Hospital, I don't know what's happening, get the explanation of benefits, you know. There are ways to understand that with real clarity. What you do, you go on aarp.org, you type in whatever keywords, you know, and that's to say, if you're specifically concerned about a Medicare, a calculator to determine what those coverage costs are. There's some really good information. So I really want you to remember that there's so much detail in a lot of what we're talking about tonight, and just generally around healthcare. You know, there's no way I can cover all of that, but I want to assure you that there's a lot of really good research around some of these facts. Now, one thing that just came up, you know, I have to say, Paul and folks here, it's all about timing, right? Yesterday I was in Braintree talking to one of our chapters. It's a very big chapter. And just before I drove down from Boston to Braintree, I got a call from the president. And Tom said to me, he said, Mike, I know you're supposed to talk about Medicare in general and Social Security and some of the work you're doing on that. But people are buzzing about this whole issue about the admission versus observation and the exposure. And I said, you're kidding. And I didn't say it that way. I said, you know what? It's weird that you're saying that, because yesterday I just gave a talk about that. Today I've gotten 2 random calls, you don't usually get it this way, asking questions about that. This is out there. I assume you're very familiar with this, right? And this is something I believe was in the, Ruth, you put that in specifically in the letter. So let me just speak to it in 2 respects. Again, these are the sort of the fundamental points to be made. How many of you have healthcare proxies? Okay? Why do you have healthcare proxies? Because you know what? You know there are going to be moments in your life, all of our lives, most likely, that you can't speak for yourself on matters of making critical healthcare decisions. And so now let's get down to a reality. It's hard for you as the patient, if you've just broken your hip or you've had an incident and your medication management has gone off the chart and you're doing something wrong and now you're in an emergency room. Are you in the position to say, oh, excuse me, am I being observed here or admitted, or what's the Medicare rules on this? And who's paying the bill? All right? I mean, it's nonsense to think seriously that we're going to see that kind of intelligent, thoughtful inquiry. It's, oh my God, the pain is driving me insane, you know, et cetera, heal me. So what I'm going to suggest to you is this. The decision about whether you are going to be held for observation or held and admitted is huge when it comes to the financial implications of that. Because Medicare may not cover it if it's not done right. So what am I suggesting? I'm asking you to talk to your healthcare proxy, your family, your daughter, your son, whatever, including your doctor, and say, you know, I just thought I'd throw this out to you. If I'm in that situation where I'm in the emergency room and something's going on, I need you to explain what's the decision around admission versus observation. What are you recommending? What are you, doctor, recommending? Somebody better ask that question if, and maybe you're not worried about this, but a lot of people should be, that the decision to observe could create a dynamic where at the end of it, you're getting yourself a bill for several $1,000s. Now, this is what's happening out there. This is what people are experiencing. Our members are hearing about it. Our members are getting the bills. And so the solution to that is really to think through who's asking that question in the toughest moment of time. And if nobody's asking that question, then you are running a risk. It's not an investment risk, but you know what? Losing $2,000 because they made a decision that they didn't think through, or somebody didn't think through, is, you know, how much of that percentage do you wipe out in an investment by just doing something like that? So I really want to encourage you, when it comes to the complicated, which again, I'm not going to get into that gory detail here, but the complicated decision around that, as it implicates Medicare coverage, is important enough to be thinking about it and having that conversation with your healthcare proxy. It's just a bit of advice. It's sort of the lawyer / ARP guy together on this one. And the second point I'm going to make is, at ARP, we are doing a lot of work in the CMS, which is the executive office, the agency in the federal government, to have conversation around the regulatory practice, the rulemaking, which decides these very, very serious questions. Because the name of the game is, you know, sort of the hot potato. Who gets to pay, right? Are you going to pay out of your pocket? Is the taxpayer going to pay? Is the employer going to pay? Is the healthcare provider going to pay? Are they going to take shot money on this? You know, somebody is going to pay for that service, and so there's a lot at stake. And for those of us who are, you know, really the ones that don't have the control that we wish we would have over these kinds of questions, one way to keep some control is to focus on that particular question, because it's out there. Now, I haven't really explained the problem. I see a lot of nodding heads. I'll tell you what it is. Very simple. If you are not admitted, if you're only held for observation, and then it turns out that they decide to discharge you to, say, a rehab because you've done something that requires a period of rehabilitation, Medicare won't cover it. Okay? Everybody thinks, and I think this way, you know, okay, well, there are certain, you know, even in a rehab, even in a nursing home, long-term care, they're going to pick up that first 20 days. But yeah, as long as you've been admitted to a hospital and then transferred over. So there are always exceptions to those rules, but the general rule is you want to be sure that that decision around when you're coming into that hospital and how long you're staying is determined in a way that ensures that Medicare covers it. Second point I want to make is this. This, yes, well, you know, here's my thought. We're gonna have some questions, right, Paul? We'll have some time for
We
panel.
can hold them.
So I want to just kind of plunge into a couple more, bigger points, and then we'll have those time. The other thing that we as an organization are spending a lot of time with is looking at what we characterize as responsible solutions to the Medicare solvency problem. Now, this is in the area of advocacy, but I do want you to be aware that some of this is big enough that when you go back to the basic question, so why is it that we don't have Medicare coverage of dental or hearing or vision? Why is that? Well, the reason's pretty straightforward. If we did, this system would be bankrupt 10 years ago instead of the next 3 or 4 if we don't do something about it. But there are tough decisions around this issue. Like, how do you raise the limit of the Medicare contribution in terms of those who are still working and those who are not, and the deduction that you're getting off Social Security? The revenues going into that system need to be addressed, and those are tough choices. And what AARP is doing is we're looking, we actually have a pamphlet, I don't have that particular one here tonight, but if you're interested, there's a very good analysis that we did both with our members as well as experts on a series of questions. How would you solve the Medicare problem, and what are the choices, and what would be the implication of a particular choice? For example, if you decided that the income limit would be opened up, so instead of being capped at 100,000 or around there, it goes up to 200,000. So you're contributing or being billed for Medicare, that additional amount of money. The amount of revenue that it would yield is not going to solve the Medicare problem. It'll show a percentage of that solution, as maybe as low as 25, 28%. And so we take a series of choices, and we look to see how we strengthen Medicare. I'm going to tell you, there's another big issue out there on Medicare. AARP talks about it a lot. We hear it from our members. I'd be very curious to know if you sense this as well. The system is so complicated, and the healthcare provider system is so complicated, that we find that there is a lot of extra services being rendered because it's a fee-for-service system. You need you go to the emergency room, let's do that X-ray. Let's set them in for a CAT scan. Maybe we'll do an MRI. And then maybe you refer to another facility. You're brought into the big city. Next time you see another battery of tests. And if you look at how it's done, it's fair to say that there are duplications and wastes of those costs that are incredible. I mean, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars of costs directly to that system that, on reflection, we have to have a serious addressing of that. And AARP is in that place of saying, we believe that before you say to a beneficiary, your coverage is even going to be thinner, we're going to cover less for you, that we've got to address this kind of waste. I'm not talking about fraud, there's some of that too. But the vast majority of the cost centers have to do with duplication of services as well as some of the other conditions that we face. Primarily, and I want to end with this, inflation has been pretty modest, but for those of you who have had these bills yourselves, I can tell you the analysis that we get from our institute, last 10 years, double. Healthcare costs have doubled. Income, 50% over the same period of time. The erosion of your buying power is very significant, and I also find, and I'm going to end with this irony, one of my clients before I became AARP director just passed away at the age of 101 years old. God love her. And she stayed in her home the whole time. I mean, she was there 60-something years. She had a lot of money that her husband set aside for her care. She private paid. And she private paid for about 5 years, and she wiped out a significant portfolio. And nothing that the government and nothing that the system that we live in would have changed that result. If you looked at her, care, and you had to provide that care, whether it was in a nursing home or even in a home. And in the end, she stayed at home, but Medicaid, not Medicare, Medicaid paid for home care services because she now qualified, because she lost everything. Now, that's a Hobbesian choice for all of you in this room as well. The statistics are out there. The average middle-class person in a nursing home, 3 years, you've wiped out whatever you've got. So it's a combination of several factors that we at ARP are focused on. Medicare, first and foremost, is the healthcare system that seniors need and rely on, and we are looking for responsible solutions to strengthen the financial stability of that. And we are absolutely in the place of trying to focus attention in the world of advocacy on how to, make those changes to strengthen that overall system. So I want to thank you for your attention again.
Well, thank you, Catherine, Tom, and Michael. I think these three presentations are both varied and incredibly helpful. And before we open up to questions, one point that was raised that I'd like to just emphasize is the healthcare proxies. I want to congratulate this audience on the percentage of people in this audience that have healthcare proxies. I would strongly urge that everyone in this room have a healthcare proxy, and not only people of our advancing age, but our children and any adult grandchildren in your families. Everyone should have healthcare proxies.
If Medicare were covering more than it does, the need for the supplements and the nature and extent of those supplements would obviously pale away. So, the pure system, the one that arguably is not something that everyone in this room would like, is one that's universal health. You're 65 years old, you're not going to get any bills for health care because we have a system that pays for that, and that's not something you have to deal with. But the truth of the matter is, obviously, there are a lot of gaps, and some of those gaps are either paid for out of your pocket or paid for and needing to be paid for by supplemental insurance. It is the system we have, and the longer these healthcare costs go up, or the longer that erosion takes place, which is a likely trend that we don't see changing, it's going to make it even more likely that Medicare will not have the full, it will continue to have less coverages, and the need for supplemental and then out-of-pocket on your part will increase.
Get around a situation, say a lot of us are in our 80s here, and you have what happened in 2008, your portfolio takes a 50% hit.
Right.
And that doesn't leave you much of anywhere to
No,
go.
so you have to balance then with the flexibility, with the spending distribution, or you have to accept a lower return by providing a greater safety net. Now, if anyone remembers, it used to be the old adage that you take your age, subtract it from 100, and that was your equity exposure. Okay, so somebody at 80, 25 years ago, they would have said, oh, you're 20% equities. Well, then when it wasn't enough and the returns in the 90s were too high, they said, no, subtract it from 110. So they goosed it a little bit. Today, if you try to do that, you're either going to have to accept a lower return or a lower payout on your money to have it be sustainable.
And I would just add one thing. There's a lot of different strategies for withdrawals and retirement, and one of the strategies is to have several years' worth of spending saved. And that's sitting in cash. As we know, it's not earning anything, but you're not going to lose it. At least it gives you a little bit of margin to weather that storm. You're not having to sell when the equity market is down.
Just a corollary to that is either that or you arrange for some bonds to come and mature in subsequent years that match that reserve, so that if the market is down, you know that those maturing bonds will provide cash to weather that temporary period in which the market is not doing so well.
Well, on behalf of the Jenks Center, I'd like to thank our distinguished panelists tonight, and I think you've imparted a lot of information and wisdom. Thank you very much. And thank everyone for coming out tonight and for the fine questions. Good evening.